Before we start, I want to ask you for any questions you'd like to have answered during the credits of the public release coming next week. There isn't any time limit, so go nuts. I'll also leave a post on the YouTube community tab and on the Patreon if you prefer to ask one there. Mean questions and any other kind are all accepted as well, so ask away. The devil is in the details. That's an ironic tagline given that this expansion's developers, Synergistic Software, ignored direct instructions from Blizzard North.
Basically, it was not made by us. We had a design doc. They didn't follow it. They made a teddy bear quest. I was fucking pissed. That's really it in a nutshell.
Lords of Destruction is an add-on that greatly enhances the original product with enough improvements that playing with it is a no-brainer. On paper, Hellfire should be the same. Faster walking in town, specialized consumables to improve equipment, new dungeons, classes, enemies and quests to bulk out the game. Yet in its vanilla state, it's a less stable, more buggy ordeal whose additions do not outweigh its negatives. To put it into perspective, Hellfire released without a number of the fixes supplied in official patches for vanilla Diablo. Even after Hellfire's release, the single minor patch it received failed to bring it up to the standard of the base game, retaining bugs that had already been fixed. You are better off not playing it. Even Hellfire's box has to festoon its marketing points, where Diablo's box does not, highlighting the differences in confidence with their respective products. The fans disliked it and Blizzard North, they despised it.
What is the story with the Hellfire expansion?
Oh my god, really? You're gonna bring that up?
I'll be courteous enough to Synergistic Software though, they had it rough. Hellfire released in November of 1997, around 11 months after the base game had completed its global release. As Blizzard North turned their sights onto Diablo 2, development of an expansion was outsourced. Developing under Sierra Online, Synergistic Software had a good list of games under their belt, proof of their capabilities. Robert Claudy, director and co-founder, had the perfect history for the genre. The first game he ever developed was Dungeon Campaign for the Apple II, developed in 1978 on a cassette tape. It was a role-playing game featuring turn-based gameplay, procedurally generated levels and items, and permadeath, an ARPG roguelike akin to Diablo's direct influences. Dungeon Campaign, however, predated Rogue by 3 years, making it one of the first commercially available roguelikes before the term could even exist. Sierra Online was co-owned alongside Davison and Associates by conglomerate CompuCard International. The CompuCard executives reasoned that grinding out an expansion pack loaded with more levels and items should be a breeze. Since the game's codebase and pipeline already existed, all the development team needed to do was create more assets. Sales should have dwarfed the relatively small production costs. Having just released Birthright the Gorgon's Alliance, and with nothing else currently on their plate, the execs approached Claudy with the proposition. The catch? They wanted the expansion ASAP. 6 weeks. That's all they were initially given. A month and a half. Synergistic were ambitious to take the contract, but they needed to take on jobs to remain employed. We were pleased as we all loved Diablo and respected the folks who had created it, said Claudy. Unfortunately, we were officially a part of Sierra, so it was actually Sierra that got the job and we reported to them. From the get-go, the development was off to a rocky start. Their representative at Sierra, Scott Lynch, did not do what was needed of him as the communication line between Claudy's team and Blizzard North broke down. Lynch was not at any of the meetings, nor was he familiar with Synergistic's work, and he never visited to learn anything about the production. As Claudy puts it, he heard what he asked about, and he asked little. On Blizzard's end, Matt Householder managed Hellfire. His duties were to review, approve or disapprove the work Synergistic Software were putting out. Coordinating with them though was via email and phone calls through Lynch. And as we know based on Claudy's accounts, Lynch wasn't in any position to be given valid feedback to Householder's inquiries. In Lynch's defense, he too was the Sierra representative for Arcanum a few years later, and Tim Kaine didn't have anything bad to say of the man, even having Troika make contact with him again after Lynch had moved to Valve to negotiate the use of the source engine for Vampire Bloodlines: The Masquerade. Leonard Boyarsky was the main liaison between Troika and Sierra, so he would have a better picture of how Lynch was to work with than Kaine, as well as there being a few years between Hellfire's development and Arcanum. items. Maybe the poor handling of Hellfire was a learning experience, or Synergistic's Claudie is stretching the truth to pass the blame. I only mention this because the sources of this inflammatory information against Lynch may be biased, and it's best to try and get a fuller picture. Regardless, communication had indeed broken down between Blizzard North and the Hellfire devs, leading to this little outburst at GDC.
Didn't work out. We couldn't communicate well with them. I was really upset about the entire thing. And in the end, I just kind of disavowed it. Now, whether or not that's the right thing to do or not, I don't know. But, I'm still a little upset about the entire way that it went down.
Both Blizzards protested having their intellectual property passed around. They felt like they were forced to make the expansion against their will. As Pat Wyatt later said, "When we were more or less forced to do the Hellfire expansion, it was over our protests, kicking and screaming all the way." Their protests fell on deaf ears with Davidson and Associates, so Blizzard North's three bosses agreed that they would help Synergistic to the best of their abilities, ensuring a quality release. Brevik had one condition: as long as we could executive produce it and get final approval on everything, we'll give them all the tools to help them get it done. After assurances that Blizzard North would be executive producers, representatives from the original team met with Synergistic to discuss the expansion and provide guidance, as well as some house rules. These guidelines were explicit. They had permission to create one new character class, 8 dungeon levels divided between 2 new environment types, a couple of music tracks, and a smattering of items and spells. The initial 6-week deadline was extended to 4 months following these meetings, but that still left little time to create and test content. To get Synergistic off on the right foot, Blizzard North supplied all of the cut content to the team, such as unused dialogue audio and sprite work, as well as a list of suggestions of quality of life improvements that they had ran out of time to implement themselves. Work started in earnest as Synergistic began to sand down Diablo's rough edges, and the initial fixes were good. They began small, smoothing out minor inconveniences such as Pepin's healing. Originally, the player would have to interact with the healer and select the healing option from the dialogue menu. Hellfire's coders mass solved the process down to a single click, where Pepin heals players automatically upon interaction, an improvement that aligned with Blizzard North's manifesto of cutting down on needless mouse clicks, and a change that would later be incorporated into Diablo 2. They added new spells for quality of life as well. Search, for example, would highlight dropped items, simplifying the process of spotting tiny rings and amulets on the dungeon floors, a common complaint from reviewers. The warp spell would zip the players straight to the dungeon's entrance or the stairs leading down to the next level, allowing players to fully explore a level and jump right to the exit rather than wasting time backtracking. Not to mention the faster walking in town, a godsend for the many town circuits players had to run. Indeed, many of Hellfire's features were planned for Diablo's original release. Most of the new enemies come straight from the original cut content. Even the oils that improve weapons and armor were a feature of earlier internal alpha versions of Diablo as well. To be fair, Donald Sang, a developer and programmer at Synergistic, gave Blizzard North full credit for these mechanical improvements. One restriction, demanded by both Blizzards, aggravated Synergistic however. Blizzard insisted on no multiplayer. Period. The decision by Blizzard was no, they can't use our multiplayer, said Pat Wyatt. They'd have to rebalance the whole game, and it would affect people's impressions of Battle.net if Hellfire is poorly balanced. We didn't have time to balance it ourselves, and they didn't have the capability to balance it because they'd never done multiplayer before. Synergistic saw a major problem with Blizzard's mandate. It was a nail in the coffin before the expansion was even born. Sang, a keen player of Diablo, had spent most of his time fighting alongside other players on Battle.net. Shipping their expansion without online connectivity would leave them open to criticism for omitting the original game's biggest selling point. The main problems came when Synergistic got a little too big for their boots. Rather than follow the supplied design document to the letter, they began adding their own ideas. This disobedience further drove a stake between the two teams, further exacerbated by the poor communication. Since Blizzard North had already begun planning and some design for Diablo 2, we needed to ensure that Hellfire wouldn't overlap or conflict, said Householder. For example, the Barbarian would be one of the new classes in Diablo 2, so we directed Sierra and Synergistic to exclude that class from Hellfire. Yet, they didn't listen, continuing to implement the class against instruction. They did stop development on additional classes, except the monk class that Blizzard approved of, but they didn't fully cut them from the game. Instead, curious gamers could gain access to these unfinished classes through an easy tweak to the commands.txt text file. The expansion's developers programmed a multiplayer option out of spite too, and out of a desire to give their product the highest possible odds of success. We tried it ourselves and LAN multiplayer worked fine, so of course that was the first thing we enabled in the text file. Yup, a single line in the text file could also be used to access a hacked-in version of multiplayer over a network. To the Synergistic team's way of thinking, they didn't directly defy Blizzard. They had been forbidden from linking Hellfire to Battle.net, but these other multiplayer options were fair game as far as they were concerned. Max Schaefer recalls how everything fell apart, leading to quote, "not pleasant interactions." They were really some of the more uncomfortable meetings I've had in my life. Going and telling them they couldn't do some of the things they were doing because it wasn't even remotely appropriate for the game. The devs I'm sure we had much more pleasant interactions with, but the upper management was resistant to our input and very confrontational. Upper management being Robert Clardy. He recalls that both Blizzard North and South did their own playtesting and both were picky. South was actually pickier, but I do not believe either of them was in the least unreasonable. They each had a reputation for high quality games. Both like to do a lot of playtesting. Diablo was their baby and not ours. It's wise to remember that these interviews with Polygon occurred years after the fact, and some of those involved may be trying their best to appear respectable. In reality, the development was a mess, spurred on by terrible communication and Synergistic being cocky. Note that Clardy's statements never refute that they wasted time implementing features that they shouldn't have, only that said complaints from the two Blizzards were perfectly valid. It's not quite an admittance of fault, but it's close. Soon after Hellfire shipped, inquisitive players uncovered its trove of secrets as instructions on how to create the text file needed to unlock the hidden features made the rounds online, including an unfitting teddy bear quest Brevik summarily refused to allow.
They made a teddy bear quest. I was fucking pissed.
Higher-ups at Blizzard discovered Hellfire's multiplayer functionality along with the rest of the game's community. They went ballistic. Once it became public knowledge on the fan forums, Blizzard, as you might imagine, tore Sierra and Synergistic a proverbial new one. As Brevik recalls, the whole thing got pretty ugly. There were lost jobs. It was not a fun time for anybody. It was frustrating for Blizzard that Diablo was their IP, and yet Synergistic did whatever they wanted to. In the end, Brevik felt like he didn't have the final say or creative control over his own brainchild. He understands the reasoning, however. In the wake of the job losses and eventual shutting down of Synergistic Software 2 years after Hellfire's release, with the ill-fated expansion being their last project, Brevik expressed remorse over the whole situation. It was sad because those guys at Synergistic were really passionate about it. It's just that we never saw eye to eye. It just didn't go right. Still though, Brevik has continued to stick to his guns, disavowing the expansion and considering it as non-canon. Hellfire was far and away Synergistic's most financially successful project according to Clardy. A combination of Diablo's brand power coupled with their decent changes meant the product sold pretty well, but it failed to hit its sales targets. When you consider that the initial 6-week development target grew by over 2 times in length, CompuCard International's soulless yet pragmatic decision to shut down the firm after such a failure is understandable from a purely business standpoint. Again, all of these exceptional interviews and research is from David L. Craddock, this time reporting for Polygon. The man is a saint for the Diablo community, making videos like this one possible. I cannot thank him and his work enough. One of the most prominent changes to the game is those additional classes, all 3 of which can be played in Devolution X. You can switch between Hellfire and Diablo in Devolution X's settings, as both versions have some prominent discrepancies we'll cover later that will determine which you should choose to play. The Monk is the only official one. An arcane visitor from an unknown land, they are highly skilled in hand-to-hand combat and a master of the staff. Hellfire's manual is bare bones compared to the base game. It still includes some lore, although it isn't obvious if this lore is from Metzen or written in-house at Synergistic. Either way, it's technically not canon as per Brevik, but I'll be referencing it regardless as I still find it interesting. Associated with the elusive Brotherhood of the Bow, monks are a rare sight in Honduras. They are said to hail from a desolate wilderness where their people were forced to flee after being conquered by an invading horde. Evidently inspired by people fleeing the Mongols, these stereotypical boilerplates vow to master the art of martial combat following the disgraceful defeat. Without access to metallurgical resources, they relied on the use of bare-handed melee and plain wooden staves as their choice of deadly weapons. Foregoing too the reliance on armor as protection in battle, focusing upon speed and concentration as their form of defense. It's rumored that a dark sickness has fallen upon them, so the Brotherhood of the Bow has made it their mission to unearth the source of this foulness. Desperate for answers, lone monks have ventured to distant lands, searching for regions that suffer a similar affection. Tales of the evil besetting Tristram meet the exact description. The monk's unique prowess with blunt staves means that he can hit 3 enemies at a time, as long as they are in front of the hero. However, a bug makes it so that the hero's AI will get confused and spin around aimlessly when fighting in groups, as he tries to hit all of the surrounding monsters, resulting in the animation stuttering and slowing hits as a result. Hand to hand is the truly unique aspect of this class. The damage can be improved by speccing into strength and dexterity, aligning well with its tabletop inspirations. It's a nice gimmick, yet a gimmick it remains. Gauntlets have no effect on the damage, so scaling is extremely limited, not to mention that we must forego any enchantments that would have benefited us from a magical weapon. At least you can still use a shield. Realistically then, staves are the wisest choice, especially as the monk is capable of blocking effectively with them as well. Attacking with bare hands is faster than using a staff, but you'll not be able to hit multiple opponents, and the spell enchantments higher tier staves have is always welcome. The monk is also unique in that we must consider what armor they're wearing. Any armor with a strength requirement causes the armor class of the monk to decrease. Unlike the base game classes, they also gain armor class per every level up, accounting for their natural affinity to dodge incoming attacks. Seeing as many of the unique pieces of armor do not have a strength requirement, as well as the game being kind enough to consider unique plates as mail when worn by the monk, in practice you'll find yourself dressing the monk much the same as any other class. The special ability this time around is the new search spell. In their harsh native climate, they were forced to find food and other essentials in the most unlikely of places. Over time, this careful searching has honed their visual perception to an almost supernatural level. As great as this spell would have been in 1997, with mods able to add Diablo 2's functionality for loot discovery, it admittedly has little use nowadays. With the next 2 classes being cut content, there isn't any lore to go off for the Bard and the Barbarian. We can assume that the cut Barbarian belongs to the same northern peoples as the official class from Diablo 2 onwards, as well as him mechanically working quite similarly. An early fan wiki from 1999 ran by the Lady of the Cake does offer some lore, but with no source itself, I must assume that this is fan written, hence unofficial and not worth mentioning. In terms of wikis, while a little bit embellished, this has been a great source. It even directly influenced the more popular Fandom Wiki, with the Fandom Wiki even copy-pasting some of the Lady of the Cake's passages verbatim. Based on the rogue character model, the Bard has the unique ability of equipping 2 separate one-handed weapons simultaneously. Although the in-game model will not reflect this, the damage and bonuses of the combined weapons is. This means it's possible to attain impressively high hit values at a far earlier time than any other class, at the sacrifice of the AC from a shield and the removal of any form of a block chance. She uses a slash style of attacking with what looks like a scimitar regardless of the type of weapons equipped, and her attack speed does not reflect the flurries made possible by wielding 2 weapons, making this essentially a melee glass cannon. The flurry has been alluded to though by her large circular attack motion being able to hit multiple enemies at once, akin to the monk's broad swings with his stave. It's likely that with more development time to actually complete the class, model and all, that the 2 weapons would be both visible on the character sprite with associated animation. Following standard Bard procedure from TTRPGs, she is the ultimate Master of None, with moderate results across the board and decent abilities as a spellcaster, second only to the Sorcerer. Her armor class lags during the early levels, so a reliance on strategic retreats is advisable until magical equipment can plug the weaknesses. For the special ability, we have the Identify spell, functioning the same way as the Scroll. As far as the class abilities go, this is by far the most useful, saving both cash and time and maximizing our time in the dungeon and interacting with the bulk of the gameplay, while simultaneously free from the negative effects the other abilities have. If it wasn't for her mediocre stats, this alone would have made her my favorite class. I love Kayn, but there's only so many times I can pop a damn portal down just to check what an item does, or buy some scrolls for the same effect. The Barbarian is equally unfinished using the Warrior's graphics. Maintaining the same theory behind the Bard's unique weapon abilities, the Barbarian's brutish strength allows him to wield huge mauls and two-handed swords as if they were one-handed weapons, with his wild swings capable of hitting 3 enemies at a time, as long as he is not using a shield. Think Conan and you'll get the idea. Seeing as the two-handed weapons are far stronger than their smaller counterparts and the Barb is able to benefit from a shield alongside them, this makes his melee abilities wholly overpowered. This was by intent, however. Synergistics Donald Sang made these changes to the wielding code on a whim, figuring that it was an easy change to allow a single class to wield weapons differently to the base game mechanics. He didn't worry about balance at times since it was completely experimental and only meant for some internal fun. They already knew early on that they weren't allowed to include these characters as directed by Blizzard North, and if the .txt file line was never discovered, they would have remained hidden as they should have been. Again though, it was this choice to even allow those meddling players to find us content that enraged Brevik. Had they followed their instructions, it should have never left their offices. Sang was under the impression that the release of the forbidden Easter eggs and classes was a result of legitimate miscommunication. Householder remembers that Blizzard discovered the hidden content during playtesting and demanded that it be removed. The next test version sent to them didn't have it, so Blizzard approved that version of Hellfire for production. Sang recalls this version and believes that a problem occurred when the approved version, lacking the forbidden content, was sent to be pressed to CD. An internal problem led to the incorrect code repository being transferred to the disc manufacturer. He explained how the Barbarian was never meant to be released. It was on one of our machines just to play around with. Then again, in a moment of truth peering through from him covering his arse, Sang does then mention that it may not have been a mistake but a deliberate stab at Blizzard North for denying Hellfire's inclusion onto the Battle.net network. The Barb's damage output may not be balanced, however due to the removal of his access to any magic, his late game viability is low at best, going against Condor's initial design philosophy that no class should be unable to use any part of the game, from types of equipment to spells. The Barb mimics classic CRPG design philosophies with his inability to wield magic of his own. He is not lacking for intelligence, he is literate enough to read scrolls, so not all is lost in the late game as you can still spam cast Firewall if needed, but without a mana pool this is still a deficiency. Relying on loot drops and Adria's inventory to try and find what you need is simply not a fun time in the long run, not to mention that he takes a very long time to cast those scrolls. Blatantly then, it's best to focus on strength and vitality rather than trying to increase magic just to cast the more powerful scrolls at the speed of a snail. To make up for this late game flaw, the Barbarian is not fragile, innately gaining 1% of resistance in all 3 categories per level up. Upon reaching level 50, you will have 50% resistance across the board without needing to rely on enchanted items to achieve the same result, granting us the pleasure of using those precious item slots to focus on more damage or higher AC instead. His special ability is Rage. For 12 seconds, 2 levels are added to Strength and Vitality and 1.5 levels to Dexterity. After the adrenal fluid outburst has run its course, Tiredness overcomes the Barb. For 12 more seconds, his Strength, Dexterity and Vitality will be decreased by the same values. For me, this skill is highly underdeveloped. The added levels are so minor that they aren't worth the effort of even right-clicking to use the ability, and the drawback is enough to kill you if your health is low enough. In the state they are in, without mods like Beelzebub to fill out their rushed nature, these extra classes are a novelty. Even the monk pales in comparison to the base game classes. If you want to play them, do so as a challenge. All classes can be viable, but the sorcerer still reigns supreme, although I can't argue that from dungeon levels 1 to around 9, the Barbarian is a breeze to play. The changes to Diablo's gameplay are minor past the aforementioned quality of life tweaks, boiling down to the additional items and spells, of which many were cut content anyway. Further refinements include a greater pool of purchasable items, with the more useful magical ones now appearing more frequently in the store inventory of Tristram's merchants, as well as the added difficulty levels from multiplayer into the single player experience, a feature that was inexplicably lacking from the original game. The main reason to play Hellfire is for the new content, 2 brand new dungeons focused at mid-game and late-game characters. The issue, however, is that Hellfire introduces aesthetics that are, at times, congruent with the gothic horror motive of the base game, moving towards a style one could better describe as a grisly Eldritch-inspired vibe. Like the Festering Nest, a biological hive-like domain that hosts organic nasties that GameSpot humorously described as Starship Troopers refugees. Hidden beneath an otherworldly tentacled growth across the river running south of the town lies the cavernous grotto, befouled by those bug-like creatures. The walls and floors themselves appear to be alive, oozing slime, the ground saturated with bubbling sludge. The monsters of the nest utilize camouflage to blend into the walls and floors, making it hard to see them until they move. At least that's my headcanon reasoning for the decision to have them so difficult to see. It could just as likely be poor art direction. On the 4th floor, we can meet the insectoid boss, the Defiler. Only by slaying him can this place be cleansed of its filth. This mini dungeon in particular is deemed by many as inferior, not only due to its disorientated and cluttered graphical decisions, but due to the lack of randomly generated layouts, meaning it can be easily memorized, working directly against Diablo's mantra of endless replayability. There are some nice touches, like the organic exploding pods replacing the barrels, or suitably gothic urns in the 2nd dungeon, the Demon Crypt. This dungeon of twisted beauty is adorned by polished black marble decorated with demonic hieroglyphs on the walls and floor. Lava, presumably from the cave levels that likely run adjacent to the crypt, can be seen beneath grated flooring. Tombs and statues litter the chambers, designating this place as a home of the demon nobility, populated with the decaying dead far stronger than the offerings in the cathedral. This new tile set, unlike the Festering Nest, works with Diablo's art direction, and is as detailed as any of the 4 original ones. Both dungeons provide new musical scores, which I'll have to tentatively attribute to Ullman. Wikipedia's source for this information is an archived GameRadio.com page, which isn't the strongest form of reliable information. I can confirm that Hellfire's sound mixer, Craig Utterback, isn't listed as making the soundtrack, only the effects and mixing. No one is giving credit for these songs officially, so it's safest to assume that these are the result of Ullman's contribution, perhaps due to time crunch or the Diablo composer not being given the adequate time to play the expansion as he had with the original product. These new tracks rely heavily on ambient tones with a more generic dungeon crawler direction, and don't measure up to the quality of the base game's music. Some of the new monsters were not cut content, represented by original artwork that isn't just differently coloured and powered variations of monsters previously used, such as in the base game. The price to be paid for all this new art is that the animations for these mobs are far less detailed, and oddly appear to be animated to the wrong frame rate, noticeably choppier than Blizzard North's efforts. The retroactively added items don't have a defining effect on the gameplay, but they don't necessarily harm Hellfire. The magical runes you can buy or find as loot didn't have that much of a use in my runs. For their cost, a scroll will do the same. I feel that they were implemented for the Barbarian, but without his official inclusion, they really aren't that special. Similar can be said of the oils that add additional damage, dexterity, or repair to your weapons. It's nice, sure, but they are found so rarely that the boost is a minor burst of happiness, soon forgotten. They would have been better appreciated had they been available from the blacksmith's shop, perhaps costing the same as the attribute boosting elixirs, providing an extra cash dump for the late game characters that have already found their best in slot equipment and are looking to beef it up further. One of Hellfire's most convenient improvements is the cornerstone of the world, a small square chamber on the first floor of the Demon Crypt. It functions like a bank vault, the first shared inventory available within the Diablo series. This is made redundant in Devolution X, but I can understand its appeal to players at the time. The hero can drop items onto the cornerstone's floor, then load into another character and retrieve them. It was a more elegant and officially supported method of moving items between save files without resorting to the Battle.net exploit. In all, reviewers weren't nearly as enthused about Hellfire as they had been about Diablo. I will mention, however, that reviews in Europe were much more favourable, given scores above 80%, which is possibly due to the importance of Battle.net. Many of the American reviews cite this exclusion as the key reason for their lower score, while the European reviews are generally pleased to have additional content to extend the life of the single-player game. As Battle.net was taking a bit of time to roll out worldwide, it's possible that the multiplayer aspect of the game hadn't taken on as strong of a stranglehold on the Euro player base as it had done so in the States. The quests were the key source of Brevik's anguish with this expansion, and if you remove those secret ones, the remaining Blizzard-approved affairs don't add much in the way of interesting gameplay. Diablo's quests aren't the greatest anyway, but these manage to be just as simple while also throwing in a dash of ridiculousness. Remember when I said Diablo takes itself seriously? Synergistic's writing spits in the face of this sincereness, with laughable voice acting and silly in-jokes that wrestle with the game's atmosphere.
Mo, at last some dignity. Are my antlers on straight?
Clearly, the developers didn't care for the lore, which is fine on a personal level, but to then harm the tone of the game you are adding to by messing around only comes across as stepping on the toes of those at Blizzard North, even if that wasn't the intention. I am talking, of course, about Lester the cow farmer, who tasks us with destroying the entrance to the nest so that he can take his cows to the orchard. Where he got this magical rune bomb from is anyone's wonder. Simply placing the bomb down will get the job done, which may not be immediately obvious, as this is the only occasion the player is required to drop something from their inventory to progress a quest in this manner. Usually just activating the needed NPC or object with the required item in your inventory will set forth the series of events for you without any lateral thinking. This inadvertently subverts the MOM test. At least the reward for the quest makes up for Lester's tonal idiosyncrasy. The Auric Amulet doubles your gold carrying capacity, alleviating a common gripe players had with vanilla. With no side quests, the only two other quests have us using a map provided by Jillian with somewhat related cut audio from the base game to open the Demon Crypt. We can then find 3 notes strewn around on the bottom tier of the dungeon that reveals a spell that will make the final boss a doozy. Without this, he will be the hardest enemy encounter in the game. Really then, the content in the Hellfire expansion is lacking substance. There isn't a whole lot of quantity nor quality, and the command.txt edit only increases the former in great detriment to the latter, starting with Lester's replacement in the complete nut. He gives us the rune bomb as usual, but also requests that we retrieve his brown cow suit. Found on the 4th level, returning the suit grants the honour of wearing the coveted bovine plate, which is really not good enough to warrant talking to this lunatic. Oh, and if you find the similar grey suit on level 3, you'll get an extra reward in some hilarious dialogue.
No! This is my grey suit. It's for evening wear. Formal occasions.
Were Synergistic in talks with Parity Interactive at the time or something? The parallels in the writing quality is truly something of note, and I certainly can't forgive the secret message from the final boss, Nah Cruel. Remember that reverse Diablo message, a reference to real-world conspiracy theories? Well, Synergistic had their own attempt at a secret message, this time once again locked behind the text file edit.
Hi, I'm free to confront the little baddest people alive, Diablo! Hi everybody, and I'm free to reward you, little mortal, with these Aerosmith tickets. You'll be getting backstage passes. You get to be scheming time from the whole band this Friday at the Coliseum. Thanks for getting me out of there. By the way, I'm gonna have to kill you. I'll be right back with Tracking Weather together.
That could have been placed verbatim into Pissed, and it wouldn't even look out of place. And here it is, that damned teddy quest. A little girl, Celia, can be found swaying near a tree on the way to Adria's shack after we open the festering nest. She's lost her play pal, Theodore, who she last saw taken by a big bug into the nest. The knight in shining armour that we are, we must forge onwards to save the wayward Theodore, who, to no one's surprise, is a teddy bear. On the 3rd level, we meet the Hawk Demon. Once defeated, he surrenders unto us the tatty stuffed toy. In return for destroying Brevik's hopes and dreams, Celia gives us the greatest reward of all, a random magical amulet we could have gotten from killing a demon like a badass, instead of saving a teddy like a jackass. Yeah, I can understand Brevik's gripe here. The lore and story do not do much to make up for the expansion's lackings. As expected, the lore is largely confined to the manual, where its brief description hardly covers a few pages. Not long before the events of the main game, a dark mage was said to be seen on the outskirts of Tristram, often lurking near the cemetery. The skulking figure did not harm the graves, so the townspeople left him alone. One evening, onlookers noticed smoke drifting from the soil, as an orange glow lit up the tombstones from below, and the dark mage mysteriously descended into the earth. Whispers of necromancy filled the tavern's gossip until they were soon forgotten as King Lyric's madness grew. Shortly before the hero returned to Tristram to duel Diablo, the cemetery began smouldering again. Splattered with a thick, glowing substance, the dark mage rose from the ground before running to the river and crossing the bridge, where he collapsed. To the townfolk's unbelieving eyes, his body dissolved and melted as the soil greedily soaked up the remains. Alarmed at the sight, some investigated the area, where they discovered an unclean, alien growth. A hard dome-like shell, impenetrable and bizarre, sat in the center of the atrocity. The people pitied the poor farmer whose land was affected, many concerned for his sanity as he had taken to talking to the cattle for hours. Hellfire's story exists in limbo within the Diablo universe. Not necessarily retconned, it is purposefully forgotten, unrecounted, and pushed to the wayside to gather dust. I'd like to say that that's a huge loss, as it's actually quite good to at least give this analysis of the expansion a glimmer of light compared to the hate it has garnered over the years, but the distaste is deserved. It doesn't add anything of note, clearly existing not as a means to enrich Blizzard North's fledgling world, but instead to serve as a mandatory requirement to set up Leicester and the existence of the 2 dungeons. It even fails to give any consideration towards Narcruel, a powerful follower of Diablo who has been trapped within the Demon Crypt. This lore can be found in-game across the several torn pieces of notes scattered throughout the dungeon by the Dark Mage. Fair dues, these discoveries do help build some tension as they hype up the demon we must face and pot down. But why we must do so is never explained. He's already trapped down here. The Dark Mage is said to have freed him, but we can already see that that's not the case. As Hellfire's gameplay is optional, even when installed, Narcruel's existence can be entirely ignored to focus on defeating Diablo instead, who actually is affecting the world negatively. Certainly, the urgency in deposing Narcruel doesn't really exist if he has no external power and is, for all intents and purposes, already defeated. He literally exists in the world as he exists in-game, as a source of loot and experience for the hero as he strengthens himself for his true calling. I can appreciate how making Narcruel the most difficult encounter in the game, unless you read the spells in the correct order, enforces exploration and fully completing a level before continuing, which is how I like to play anyway. And you know what is never explained? Who even is Narcruel? He isn't one of the primevals or their lieutenants as set forth by Metzen. What is this demon crypt? According to his in-game speech, Diablo trapped him.
Out of my way, wretched human! Retribution calls for he whom you call Diablo!
But why? And why should we even care? Clearly the devs didn't care enough to give him any significant backstory. Maybe they weren't allowed to as part of those strict Blizzard guidelines. But at the end of the day, it's evident why Hellfire hasn't been referenced in future games. It's a non-story. There are no stakes and no reason for it to even be a footnote. There is only a single piece of notable cut content I can find for Hellfire, which cannot be accessed via editing the text file, and that is the wandering trader that was restored in Beelzebub. References to him exist in the code, as well as graphics for it being found within the same folder as the other townspeople. Messaging on a forum sang reminisced on the lost feature. The initial artistic concept was a gnome-like guy with a backpack taller than he was, who would sing you a ditty describing what he was looking for, a non-magical piece of equipment like a helm, a shield, or a sword, then wait for a while until you left the level or traded with him. If you traded the item he asked for with him, he'd toss you something magical in return. An interesting repeating mini-quest concept. Of course it is a wild goose chase, but it doesn't seem any worse than the other lackadaisical inclusions of Hellfire, so his cut-in is a mystery. Whether you choose to play Hellfire or not via Devolution X then is down to how much weight you put on the additional gameplay choices of the oils and such, as well as the additional dungeons and quests. The extra classes are available in DevX's version of the base game without additional content, and for purity's sake, I can see the appeal in playing these classes without the extra bells and whistles. Regardless of how little value the new content adds to the game, over 20 years on, and for the additional price of nothing, I personally see playing with Hellfire enabled as a why not scenario. The bugs have been fixed, the silly hidden quests can stay hidden, and the additional dungeons can be ignored, while still offering a convenient way to find additional loot and level up without reloading the game and grinding previous dungeon levels again, offering a breath of fresh, if not a little acrid, air. Many may not know this, Diablo received 2 ports in its lifetime. The most famous may be the PlayStation 1 console version, notable for its graphical differences, but it's the Mac version that intrigues me the most. Developed internally at Blizzard, information regarding this direct port is seriously a mystery. I can find interviews with Inside Mac Games, who visited Blizzard a few times throughout the late 90s and early 2000s to interview Brian Love and Bill Roper for their digital exclusives. However, there isn't a lot of insight to be gathered here.
Blizzard's always been a big supporter of the Macintosh market and will continue to be so. Mac players are very, very loyal players of games, and if we can bring our products across to the Macintosh gamers, we will continue to do so.
As Roper makes clear, at that time Blizzard was happy to support Mac, even if they didn't put much effort into it. The team left to wrestle each game to macOS from their native Windows aren't even credited in the game's credits. With a lack of support, oftentimes these Mac ports came late, in this case due to an issue in porting over the BattleNet code. Diablo for Mac didn't come out until a year and a half after the PC release, hitting shelves in May of 1998, 2 months after its console release and only 2 years before the direct sequel. Sales of the Mac version must have been strong enough to warrant a port for said sequel, which, unlike Diablo, received its Mac port within the same month as the Windows edition. Why the Mac version for Diablo took so long in comparison is unclear, but based on these Inside Mac gaming videos, my assumption is that it's due to the tiny team assigned to the project. There appears to only be 2 developers working on the assignment. Technically and gameplay wise, the port is perfect and it's impossible to notice any differences when playing, which is as good as a port can be. It even came with the patches on the disc pre-installed, but does not offer Hellfire. Hellfire wasn't even released for the Mac. They weren't missing out on much though. In March of 1998, Diablo saw the light of a CRT television and the 5th generation console hardware long before Diablo 3 made a big deal about its console versions. Released for the original PlayStation, developed by Climax and published by Electronic Arts, PlayStation's Diablo port is quite the oddity. Climax had already proved their mettle to Blizzard beforehand, having ported Warcraft 2 to the Sega Saturn and PlayStation a year earlier. And if you're wondering, a Saturn port of Diablo was announced, but as Sega's console division threw itself headfirst into its own death spiral, this never came to fruition. It was actually through the PlayStation port that the Devolution X team were able to reverse engineer the original source code so as to create their engine rewrite. After an estimated 6,000 man-hours, using the PS1 copy and comparing it with the PC version, they released their source code, where Brevik himself confirmed it was near to identical to the real thing. Surprisingly, it is a complete port of the base game, sans online play. A unique 2-player cooperative mode was developed instead as a compromise to the missing BattleNet feature. Understandably, with the weaker hardware, expectation of couch gaming and a controller, many more compromises had to be made in the UI and graphical department. Yet from a pure gameplay standpoint, PlayStation Diablo is the same experience as you would find on its beefier PC counterpart. Animation is jerkier than in the original, and frames drop at the most crucial moments when hordes of demons are descending on your position, all the while your eyes struggle to make out the detail with the lowered resolution and blurrier visuals. With the game slowdown, there are instances where the controls can become sluggish overall though. Reviews did state how this wasn't awful, remembering that console games were often expected to struggle at times, at least during this generation. From a contemporary point of view, I found the frame drops and subsequent control disconnect to be very annoying, especially when it led to an early death. This zoomed in FOV too hurts the viability of both sorcerers and rogues, as ranged abilities don't have as much of an impact when you have less time to destroy the approaching enemies. Even warriors will find themselves wandering into a fog of monsters they didn't expect, since it's difficult to pinpoint them until it's too late, especially when going around corners. And while the game can be saved at any point, forget relying on a quick save before trying anything daring. The game will grind to a halt for a solid 10 seconds as it writes to the memory card. For authenticity's sake, the emulator I'm playing this on even maintains this hindrance. The 2-player mode too suffers from having to force the players to stick together into the already diminished field of view, limiting range of movement. There are a few unexpected improvements in the graphics compared with the PC version, like birds flying around in Tristram, as well as the river consisting of flowing water instead of artistically placed putty. Hell, there's even a reflection now. 1 year of development well spent. Seriously though, despite the necessary concessions, this is a thoroughly impressive demake. PlayStation Diablo manages to retain enough of what made it a success on the PC to appease console gamers who were looking for a good dungeon romp. And from a collector's standpoint, I'm sure this would be a fine addition to anyone's 5th generation collection. It even has narrated versions of the lore sections from the manual, and the option to listen to all the books found throughout the game without even having to find them, instead listed under history straight from the main menu. Most impressive to me, apart from a double speed mode perfect for speedrunners and shortening the time spent traveling around town, is that the translation to the gamepad works really well. It isn't as fluid as Diablo 3 or 4 on a controller, but for the time, remembering that many PlayStation gamers didn't even have access to analog sticks, the game controls decently enough. All the necessary functions have been crammed in there, even hotkeys for health and mana potions. This is partly due to Diablo's innate simplicity. Moving with the D-pad and pressing just a single button to attack and another for your secondary skill is all you need. Of course, the sorcerers out there are already seeing the problem. How are you going to quickly toggle through all of your spells without having to resort to staring at the assortment of pause screen menus the PlayStation version uses to replace the pop-up menus on the PC? Well, the team at Climax have accommodated that to some degree with the use of a hotkey toggle. By default, the face buttons can switch your abilities. By holding down R2, you can unlock an additional 4 more hotkeys, in total giving you 7 programmable hotkeys at your disposal. I won't lie, wrapping my head around this during gameplay took some time. Certainly as a controller hasn't been my go-to interface in quite a while, but I'm sure a more skilled console gamer could pull off some impressive combos with the help of this scheme. Something I'd wish more console games would learn from this is how customizable this control scheme is, with a variety of pre-made options and even the freedom to design your own options to fine-tune the controls to your liking. It's no wonder that Blizzard games had the reputation they did in the 90s, when even the console ports had this much consideration put into them. In reality, however, this port isn't worth the time and effort to play unless you're a stickler for the original PlayStation. The Devolution X version this port made possible is much superior and maintains that great controller support Climax developed back in 1997. This time around, it even allows analog sticks.
It must be so good to look back and think your ideas back then you turned into such a huge, not just a game that you love, that so many people love. You must pinch yourself sometimes.
Oh god, yeah, it's incredible to me. I mean, it's weird because there just were not as many games then. That's also a big factor, but it's weird to me that I was involved in such a gigantic project. It's still a little surreal, you know. It's even though I was part of it, it's an incredible time in my life and I loved every minute of it. It's still like sometimes you just can't explain how things happen.
Speaking of legacy, the famous hidden cow level of Diablo 2 that has since become a meme for the series was a direct result of rumors amongst Diablo fans within forums. The cow level then was a tongue-in-cheek way of interacting with the fan base.
There were kind of rumors, these just completely false rumors that there are these cows in Diablo 1. If you clicked on them a certain amount of times, like secrets and stuff in all sorts of games.
Yeah.
But there's this rumor going around that if you clicked on them, like, I don't know, whatever, 1,000 times or something like that, then you get to go to the secret cow level, when it was totally false. Somehow this thing like spread like wildfire, and everybody was like trying to get to the secret cow level, and how do you get to it and all this stuff. So in the second game, we decided, let's just put the secret cow level in, because that'll be funny.
Diablo formed a schism in the CRPG market, as Dr. Matt Barton explained in his History of CRPG's contribution on Gama Sutra, now GameDeveloper.com. The publication of Diablo in 1996 remains one of the most divisive moments in CRPG history. Even today, nearly a decade later, no other game has polarized CRPG fans more than Diablo. Are Diablo and its sequel the best CRPGs ever made, or the worst? At least among experienced fans of the genre, the jury is still out. When compared to the highly immersive simulators of the Ultima Underworld series, or the complexities of the original Fallouts or any D&D inspired CRPG, Diablo's simplistic pick a class and left click the win formula fundamentally spat in the face of those high concept iterations. It proved what many publishers were spouting, even if it was intentional. RPGs were dead because they had niched down so specifically to a hardcore audience that their intricacies turned off the more casual gamer. Diablo came in to show that the wider gameplay and market wasn't totally against the idea of role-playing in a fantasy world and kicking fanciful arse.
I think that largely RPGs have become, there are two big differences. One is that RPGs mainly focused on party play. You were like one of 6 characters, and so they were kind of turn-based and slow and plotting. There were hints of real-time games that were like that, like Eye of the Beholder, which was semi-real-time kind of thing, even though they were still party-based. Having all of these characters and the kind of the maintenance with all these characters started to turn people off. It was pretty laborious to go through and, you know, I've got to move this particular weapon from this character to this character, and it was 6 times the amount of work or whatever, you know, and the party makeups were all the same. It's like, I've got my tank, I got my healer, I've got my wizard, I got my, you know, rogue. There was really no variety to it, as well as it just became difficult and kind of tedious to work on 6 characters at once. So reducing that down to 1 character was a big change. It was very different than most RPGs at the time.
Now, Dr. Barton's quote may seem odd today, as we now split these 2 types of games as entirely different genres, CRPGs on the left and ARPGs on the right. Surely that alone shows how much influence Diablo had on the genre. By respawning the somewhat forgotten for the time games like Rogue, they pivoted the RPG from its path towards obscurity, subsequently spawning a fandom of developers that would take its elements to further push ARPGs into what they are today. Diablo clones, the looter shooter, even recent changes in Bethesda's formula can all be attributed to the idea first iterated in Diablo and subsequently made far more famous through Diablo 2.
We had a very different vision for Diablo 2. We had a lot more experience about what we were doing. We understood the market a lot better. We understood that we were building upon this fantastic game. With Diablo 2, it was definitely more in lines with my expectations. Even, it still exceeded my expectations and still does today.
The lessons learned from Diablo directly resulted in the success of its sequel. In 2000, more complex and larger than its predecessor, with updated graphics as impressive as Diablo's had been in 1996, Diablo 2 cemented the formula still replicated today by the likes of Paths of Exile and The Last Epoch. Explorable outdoor areas as well as dungeons, skill trees, linear quests, and a tightly integrated storyline with cutscenes. Diablo broke so many traditions for PC games at that time. It was for Windows 95, it was DirectX, it was multiplayer over the internet with a free service, it had state-of-the-art 256 color graphics, and it ran quickly. It broke ground as a genre. The first Diablo was, in a lot of ways, revolutionary. That definitely helped its success and helped Blizzard's success overall. For the relatively short amount of time it takes to complete, if you consider yourself a Diablo or even a general ARPG fan, Diablo 1 through Devolution X is worth your time to check out. It isn't nearly as difficult to get into as the true father of the genre, and it will be close enough to what you know to still be enjoyable as you discover how each small decision inspired your favorite title in the genre. It deserves your time, and proves that with a little wax and polish from dedicated fans, even an old dog can learn enough new tricks to stand the test of time. From there, Diablo grows to what you want it to be. With 20 years of mods under its belt, you can test your skills to the highest degree, experience Diablo 1.5 with Beelzebub, or dive into the hardest challenge Tristram has to face with the Hell 3, a torturous proof of passion for the original Diablo, introducing a variety of new classes and subclasses to diversify gameplay, with a challenge far beyond your worst nightmares. Diablo 2 just about steals my heart as my favourite in the series, but Diablo 1 easily takes the second spot. It isn't even a competition.
Asking to choose a favorite is a little bit like asking what's your favorite child. Sure. You know, it's I think both of them shine in different ways, and to be able to create my dream game that I had worked on since I was 16, that was just such an amazing opportunity with Diablo 1, and I was super proud of the way that it came out, and to kind of like break all of these barriers where it was like you could play with people over the internet right out of the box and you didn't need a service or anything like that, and having this real-time random generated world or whatever was amazing. And then with Diablo 2.
Just before we tie this all up, there has been some speculation of a Diablo Remastered, in the vein of Diablo 2 Resurrected. Evidence for this is purely based on Diablo 1's new home back on Battle.net, and the recent Game Pass inclusion. It had previously only been on GOG, there was even a period where it was officially abandonware. Personally, I'd love to see a remaster, especially if they can nail the dark atmosphere. For the most part, I feel they did a good job on D2 Resurrected, and the same treatment of D1 would certainly bring awareness of this legendary classic to the modern masses. Undoubtedly, if it comes with a console port as the Diablo 2 remaster did. Nostalgia would probably be enough to make me prefer the crispness of Devolution X, the same way I prefer that over Beelzebub, but without actually playing said speculated remaster, I can't say that with confidence. Thanks for watching, and a huge thank you to all Patreon and YouTube members. These videos wouldn't be possible without all of your help. As always, I'll see you in the next one.